Greetings, everyone. First, let me thank Matthias Scheffler for organizing this virtual conference and for inviting me to present here. The story I'm going to tell unfolded over a period of many years and has culminated in a polymer informatics capability that integrates polymer science with artificial intelligence methods. I wish to acknowledge the contributions and participation of numerous people, students, postdocs, and collaborating colleagues, as well as the sponsorship of several federal agencies and industry. Before I dive into the main substance of my talk, let us consider some challenges the materials development community faces. To meet specific application needs, materials may need to be selected from a known palette of possibilities or may have to be designed or discovered from scratch. Regardless, typical application needs involve multiple property requirements, and a lot of times the requirements are incompatible or conflicting. For instance, an application may require high values of two properties, and the two properties may be inversely related to each other. The best option in such situations is optimization. That is, finding a material solution that offers an optimal combination of the desired property values. This leads to the next challenge, which is that the chemical and morphological space of materials is vast, practically infinite, and searching the space to locate optimal solutions is highly non-trivial. One pathway that many are considering today is to use past data or intentionally created data to build models that can help efficiently discover solutions that can surpass human imagination, such as what nature does in the realm of biology and what machines, in partnership with humans, have done recently in the area of cognitive games. Now, here is a simple way of understanding how one may use existing data to build predictive models within material science and engineering. Say we have a data set of n materials for which we know the values of some property P, determined either through direct measurements or laborious simulations. The question we would like to answer using just this data set is, what would the property value be for a new material X? It turns out that under certain circumstances, we can give good and useful answers to this question. The process by which we do this proceeds as follows. First, the textual labels of the materials should be converted to machine-readable form. That is, the identity of each material needs to be represented in terms of a numerical vector or a fingerprint. Fingerprinting is a critical step in this process, requiring a fair amount of domain knowledge and experience. In the next step, called the learning step, the numerical fingerprints are mapped to the corresponding property values. The learning step is essentially a function finding exercise, and one may use one of many machine learning algorithms for this purpose. Once the function has been found, the original question posed pertaining to material X may be answered by first fingerprinting material X, followed by feeding this fingerprint to the discovered function, yielding the property of material X. I now switch to our polymer informatics work. Our data for polymers come from multiple sources and span over 30 properties. Data for some properties come from DFT computations performed by us, while data for most properties are obtained from measurement and collected from databases, journal articles, textbooks, and handbooks. At this time, the database contains several thousand polymers for which some property value is available. The next step in the model building pipeline is curation of the dataset, followed by fingerprinting each of the polymers. We have developed a hierarchical fingerprinting strategy for polymers that encodes atomic level, block level, and chain level information. The atomic level fingerprint components include information on whether a given triplet of atomic level fragment is present in the polymer of interest. For instance, C3S2C3 represents a three-fold carbon atom connected to a two-fold sulfur atom, which is in turn connected to a three-fold carbon atom. We have a catalog of all such fragments that may be found in polymers. We figure out the occurrence frequency of each fragment in the polymer that needs to be fingerprinted and use this information to populate the corresponding fingerprint components. Likewise, the block level and chain level fingerprint components encode information at successively higher length scales. We find that accurate prediction of several polymer properties require consideration of such multi-scale fingerprint components. Let me now say a few words on the learning algorithm we have used extensively in the past within this project, which is Gaussian process regression, or GPR. This is a Bayesian approach that utilizes similarities between cases to arrive at a prediction for a new case. For instance, suppose that we want to predict the properties for a new case, which is represented in the fingerprint space using the green circle in the image on the left. The red circles are cases from our training dataset for which we already know the answer. GPR uses the distance in fingerprint space between the green and the other points to estimate the property value of the green point case. And as a bonus, we also obtain an uncertainty value for each prediction. As can be seen from the plot on the right, new cases that are close to training data points will tend to have smaller uncertainties, naturally. Once all the pieces are in place, one can go about building property prediction models. Here is a summary of the entire workflow, which we call the polymer genome property prediction pipeline. It starts with polymer data on the left, followed by a fingerprint generator that provides polymer fingerprints. A learning algorithm then maps the fingerprints to available property data, leading to property prediction models that may be deployed to a prediction platform. In our case, the prediction platform is called Polymer Genome, which may be accessed at polymergenome.org. Let us have a look at some example prediction models that we have developed, which span properties ranging from electronic to optical to thermal to mechanical, etc. In each of these parity plots, the machine learning model predictions are in the y-axis and the ground truth results, be it computational or experimental, are plotted along the x-axis. While perfect agreement between ML model predictions and the ground truth results is not at hand, this level of performance is acceptable, given that each DFT or experimental point may take days or even weeks to arrive at, but the ML predictions are near instantaneous. At this time, we have developed models for a few dozen properties, all of which can be accessed from polymergenome.org. And here is a demonstration of the Polymer Genome platform in action. I'm going to let this video run for a minute or so. One of the attractive features of this capability is the draw tool, which makes it much easier for users to interact with the interface, with the ML predictive models. And we use the star symbol to indicate the connection points of the repeat unit. I mentioned earlier that we have used GPR to develop predictive models. While GPR is extremely powerful, there are some scenarios when we may have to use or look for other options. One such situation we encountered was when we desired to predict what would be good solvents and non-solvents for polymers. An example is shown here for polyethylene. Being able to predict solvents or non-solvents for polymers can help with polymer synthesis and processing steps. We were able to address this problem of solvent selection using deep learning. with the training dataset composed of over 4,500 polymers, for each of which solvent and non-solvent examples are known and available. Training was performed using an architecture composed of two neural subnetworks, one that takes polymer fingerprints as input and another that takes solvent descriptors as input. The outputs or latent spaces of both subnetworks are merged and a decision is made on whether the input solvent is a good solvent or a non-solvent for the polymer under consideration. This approach works remarkably well compared with other traditional strategies adopted for solvent selection, such as using the Hildebrand model. This slide shows two plots, with the top one comparing the performance of our deep learning based model with the currently used Hildebrand model for the selection of good solvents for an assortment of 24 solvents. Each histogram bar is the result of averaging the predictions over the more than 4,500 polymers we considered. Likewise, the bottom plot shows the performance comparison for non-solvents. As can be seen, our deep learning model performs exceptionally well relative to the current state of the art. The rest of my talk will be forward-looking. Thus far, we have accumulated data computationally ourselves or have relied on manual capture of data from the literature and have used this data to build prediction models for a variety of polymer properties. But we are reaching a bottleneck due to the painstaking nature of the data generation or data collection process. Fortunately, AI capabilities can help us out. Future efforts will likely use autonomous computational and experimental workflows to systematically and continuously generate data in regions of poor knowledge of regions of data sparsity. Natural language processing or NLP capabilities are being built by us and others in the material science community to capture data from the literature in a sustainable, continuous, and autonomous manner. But ultimately, we would like to solve inverse problems, namely designing or identifying materials that meet target property requirements. This is the inverse of the property prediction pipeline I described earlier. I will now briefly describe two inversion algorithms we are exploring, namely genetic and generative algorithms to solve polymer design problems. The genetic algorithm is not new. It is a method for solving optimization problems and is inspired by nature's strategy that drives biological evolution. Within the context of polymers, say our goal is to maximize a particular property. Imagine an initial population of polymers created using a palette of allowed chemical building blocks or fragments. We retain the top n members of this population who have the highest values of the desired property, as predicted by our machine learning models. These polymers form the first generation parents. We then allow them to reproduce to create offsprings or the next generation. The reproduction process happens by taking a random piece of one parent polymer and splicing it with a random piece of another polymer. And at a predetermined rate, a chemical fragment of an offspring polymer may be replaced or mutated by a randomly chosen member from our palette of fragments. Mutations are essential to explore possibilities outside of the gene pool of the first generation candidates. The pool of offspring polymers is further down-selected to create a pool of n polymers with the highest values of the desired property values, again predicted using our machine learning model, thus creating the next generation parents. This process continues iteratively from generation to generation until a prescribed number of polymers are above a target value of the desired property. As an example exercise, we sought to design polymers with high glass transition temperature and large band gap values, both of which may be predicted well using our current machine learning models. Such property criteria are desired for polymers that can withstand large electric fields at high temperatures, These polymers may find applications in energy storage devices, for instance. The figure on the left shows a schematic of the chemical space of polymers explored through 100 generations. Polymers encountered in early generations are spread out over a wide chemical space, but in later generations, as we advance towards our objective, the algorithm steers the designs towards a specific region of interest indicated by magenta dots. The plots on the right show how the property values evolve through the generations. The shaded regions indicate the range of values displayed by members of a given generation, and the solid lines indicate the average values. This evolutionary strategy to design materials with optimal property or performance metric is very simple, efficient, and very effective, especially when it is combined with fast property prediction models. Finally, I wish to discuss an emerging generative algorithm, the variational autoencoder, or VAE. This algorithm, after a solid training process on millions or even billions of examples, has been successfully utilized in disparate fields to generate images and videos and moves and decisions in computer games. It has also been used effectively to design molecules and drugs that display desired target properties. We have adapted this approach for polymers. The VAE is composed of an encoder neural network that takes as input the chemical structure of the polymer or its SMILES representation, and outputs a compact but multidimensional representation which may be viewed as a point in a multidimensional space called the latent space. The decoder does the opposite. It takes a point in the latent space and converts it into the original polymer. In case you're wondering why we go into all this trouble of encoding first and then decoding, consider this. The latent space representation may be viewed as the polymer fingerprint, which can be mapped to known property values, thus leading to a predictive model. Once the training of the encoder, decoder, and the prediction models are done, property prediction for a new case may be performed by going from left to right via the encoder and down to the property value via the property prediction model. If, on the other hand, the goal is to design polymers with desired property values, we go up to the latent space and identify points in the latent space that map to the appropriate desired property values, and then we go to the right via the decoder to polymer designs. An important point to note is that the training process of the encoder-decoder pair is an unsupervised learning problem, meaning that we just need examples of polymer chemical structures, but not necessarily their property values. But we need an enormous number of such examples, and these examples must be valid chemical structures. In order to impart efficiency to the training process, rules or syntax that make for valid chemical structures may be taught or hardwired within the encoder-decoder networks. When the correct grammar and semantics corresponding to valid chemical structures are incorporated in the networks, the VAE is called syntax-directed VAE. We have successfully trained such a syntax-directed VAE or SD-VAE and have used it to design polymers with high glass transition temperatures and large bandgap values. The plot on the left shows a two-dimensional representation of the latent space of polymers discovered by our SD-VAE, along with color coding of the points based on the glass transition temperature value of the polymer corresponding to each point. And cases with particularly large glass transition temperature values are shown using red circles. Likewise, the plot on the right shows the same plot, but this time the color coding is based on the predicted bandgap values. Polymers with high glass transition temperature and simultaneously high bandgap values can be obtained by looking for polymers in the region between the two sets of red circles in the two plots. Polymer designs with simultaneously high band gap and glass transition temperature values obtained using both the genetic and generative algorithms are shown here. Although the specific target property criteria sought using the two algorithms are not exactly the same, similar chemical structures emerge. For instance, saturated cyclofragments, oxygen atoms in the rings, and fluorinated carbons are common recurring motifs. Such polymers have not been considered before for energy storage applications. Our ability to adapt such powerful approaches within material science attests to the power AI methods hold for assisting in the discovery of materials that can potentially be useful while going beyond past human imagination. With that, let me quickly summarize where we are and where we would like to go. Utilizing materials data that may be easily accessed or generated to build predictive models can yield enormous practical value. What lie in the horizon for material scientists are methods to efficiently and sustainably capture or produce data and to utilize the knowledge gleaned from such data to solve inverse problems. Thinking even farther ahead, material scientists will integrate traditional approaches with AI methods to not just design materials that meet property or performance needs, but also to determine how best to synthesize and process the designed materials. I would not have a story to tell today without the hard work, dedication, and ingenuity of a number of students and postdocs, many of whom are still active in the group now, and many who have moved on and are flourishing elsewhere. I am fortunate to have had the opportunity to work with them. I am also very deeply indebted to several collaborators who have influenced my thinking in many ways. And none of this would have been possible without the generous support of several federal agencies and industry sponsors for trusting us with their purse. And finally, thank you all for your attention.